Welcome to DC Trending News, the leading news channel about world political events. Today's news: retreat from Kiev, a bridge too far in the Donbass, and the sinking of the Moskva. The flight from Snake Island is only the latest in a long line of humiliating defeats for Russia's army in Ukraine, a goodwill gesture. That's how the Kremlin tried to play down the retreat from Ukraine's Snake Island on Thursday after commanders gave up hope of holding the strategically important headland under heavy artillery fire. It is the same phrase Putin's lackeys used to cover up their ignominious retreat from Kiev, Chernihiv, and Sumy in early April when the first phase of their war in Ukraine failed spectacularly. But these are far from the only mistakes Russia's Red Army has made on the battlefield. From an early defeat trying to take Hostomel airfield, to failed river crossings in the Donbass, to the sinking of the flagship Moskva, there have been many embarrassing moments for Putin and his commanders. Here, Mail Online takes a look back at all the defeats that have shamed what was once the world's second-best military. Hostomel airport attack, the 24th and the 25th of February. In the early hours of the 24th of February, as Putin launched his long-dreaded war against Ukraine, more than 20 helicopters carrying Russian special forces and paratroopers landed at Hostomel airport, one of the main airfields near Kiev. Their mission was to capture the airfield so that thousands of Russian troops waiting in reserve could land there and attack Kiev itself to capture or kill the government and quickly end the war. Russia assumed that the airport, home to the world's largest aircraft, the Antonov and Tu-25 Mriya, would be lightly defended after the FSB declared that Ukrainian soldiers would lay down their weapons rather than fight brothers from Russia. This calculation proved to be extremely inaccurate. Instead, the Russian troops met fierce resistance, with several helicopters being shot down on the way to the airfield. The soldiers who managed to land were met on the ground by tanks, armored vehicles, and hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers and National Guardsmen. An intense two-day battle ensued, with control of the airfield changing hands several times and Russia sending in a second wave of helicopters, up to 200, according to Moscow, before Ukraine defeated the attackers and scattered its remaining troops into the surrounding countryside. The exact number of casualties is still unclear, but hundreds of soldiers are believed to have been involved in the fighting, and pictures of the airport suggest there was fierce fighting. Among the burnt-out wreckage found there were the remains of the Antonov plane, sinking of the Saratov, the 24th of March. While the first weeks of the Russian war in the north were quickly doomed to failure, the Russians achieved moderate success in the south. A month after the start of the invasion, they had taken the regional capital Kherson, surrounded Mariupol, and were in the process of opening a land bridge between Crimea and the occupied Donbass. But on the 24th of March, the mood changed when the Saratov, a huge 370-foot Russian tanker docked in the captured southern port city of Berdyansk, was sunk. 3 days earlier, the television station Zvezda, which is linked to the Ministry of Defense, had filmed the Orsk dropping anchor in Berdyansk and unloading armored vehicles that, according to the presenter, were to help in the battle to capture the city of Mariupol, some 40 miles to the east. The transmission suggested that Ukraine might use the footage to hit the ship, and on the 24th of March a nearby missile battery did just that. At around 7:45 a.m., a Tokayu ballistic missile struck the deck of the Saratov, which was in port alongside two smaller ships, the Caesar Kunikov and Novokakast. A large fire broke out on board the Saratov and several explosions were heard below deck as munitions detonated. Images taken from the shore showed that the Saratov went up in smoke, while the Caesar Kunikov and Novokakast were also damaged. Satellite images confirmed that the Saratov sank shortly afterwards, blocking the port from use. Russia has not commented on the attack or given details of the casualties. Withdrawal from Kiev at Chernihiv, April 1st to 8th. The Ukrainian capital Kiev was attacked at the very beginning of the war on the 24th of February and remained Russia's main target for weeks, bombarded with rockets day and night, infiltrated by special forces intent on killing Zelensky, and caught in a pincer movement of Russian troops from both sides. The prospects for the city looked bleak, at least for a while, but the tide turned at the end of March. A 40-mile Russian death convoy snaking north from the capital had largely stalled and was intercepted by Ukrainian air and ground attacks. Russian troops abandoned their positions, retreated or surrendered without a fight, while Ukrainian tractors towed dozens of tanks, armored vehicles, and air defenses. Attempts to storm the city from both the west and the east were repulsed, and Ukraine had even begun to launch counterattacks against Russian forces. On the 25th of March, Russian generals told state media that they would focus their efforts on capturing the Don base, hundreds of kilometers to the east, after achieving their objectives around Kiev and nearby Chernihiv. Around the 1st of April, the complete withdrawal of Russian forces from the area around the capital began, while Ukraine retook the surrounding villages and towns behind the backs of the retreating troops. By the 8th of April, according to British intelligence, the withdrawal was complete and there were no Russian troops left in the northern parts of Ukraine. What the Russians left behind was evidence of massacres and terror campaigns in occupied towns such as Bucha and Irpin, but nonetheless the withdrawal meant and still means for Russia the greatest defeat of the war so far and the end of the first phase of its campaign. Sinking of the Moskva. The 14th of April, the Moskva was the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, named after the Russian capital, and was considered an essential part of a feared amphibious assault on the Ukrainian port city of Odessa. But by the end of the 14th of April, the missile cruiser Moskva lay at the bottom of the Black Sea, its hull punctured by two holes that Ukrainian Neptune missiles had rammed into its side. The sinking of the Moskva may not have changed the course of the war to the same extent as the withdrawal from Kiev. But it is perhaps the greatest symbolic victory of the conflict so far, and a major embarrassment for Putin. For a head of state who compares himself to Peter the Great, it was a humiliation to lose the pride of his Black Sea Fleet, founded by Peter's daughter Catherine, to an enemy without a functioning navy. For Ukraine, it was all the more delicious because the Moskva was the very warship that the heroic soldiers on Snake Island told to F off in the early days of the war. The Kremlin has also tried to massively downplay the number of casualties, claiming that only one sailor died and 27 were injured before the other 396 crew members were rescued. Ukraine speaks of up to 250 dead, which would be largely consistent with warships exploding before sinking.